I've conducted a long, detailed, comprehensive review of those allegations. And I've concluded that the Star Ledger allegations about pressuring employees to donate to board election campaigns are inaccurate, unfair, and unsubstantiated. The Star Ledger had 7 identified sources for their story, and knowingly or unknowingly, every one of those sources was biased against this Elizabeth Board of Education. That bias wasn't disclosed, and the non-disclosure of that bias violated ethical guidelines for journalists that should have been observed. And as I said before, knowingly or unknowingly, the Star Ledger article relied on 7 identified sources. And I'm going to talk about each one of them to you. But every single one of them had documented adversarial relationships with the board or the superintendent, and the Star Ledger articles and its editorials never disclosed that they had biased sources. Also, the Star Ledger articles never explained that there's been a decade of hostility between Senator Lesniak's political organization, Mayor Bolwich, who's an ally, and the board, and that Senator Lesniak consistently, repeatedly, has been trying to undermine this board by requesting the State Department of Investigation to conduct audits, investigations, monitorings. He and his allies have submitted Oprah requests. He's done everything he could to drag down this school system. As to why he's done it, you'd have to ask him. And that kind of harassment has gone on for the last 5 or 6 years. Like this. The foul odor in Elizabeth these days cannot be blamed on oil refineries along the turnpike. It is from the ethical rot created by the city's Board of Education. And the editorial goes on and says, several authoritative sources, including a former superintendent, Tom Dunn, whom the board fired, and a former principal, Frank Cuesta, say that is precisely what happens. You're shut out of the system if you don't donate money. An ugly, harsh, unfair, distorted editorial. Elizabeth's ranking on the state tests compared to those other 37 communities have gone up. For example, there is only one school district in New Jersey that has had 3 public schools in the last 5 years awarded the blue ribbon, and that school district is Elizabeth. But the Washington Post every year publishes a challenge index, and we cite to the website in the report. It evaluates high schools throughout the country on the basis of how well they prepare students for college. In 2011, they ranked the Elizabeth high schools 2nd in New Jersey and 176th in the country. But in 2005, when Pablo Munoz became superintendent, Elizabeth had 11 kids that made perfect scores on the state standardized test. In 2011, on November 22nd, 2011, they had the perfect score award ceremony in Elizabeth, at which all the parents were invited to see 330 perfect score awards given to Elizabeth high school kids. That's an increase of about 2,600%. We had 131 employees who attended. And of those 131 employees, 41% never made a donation to a board election campaign. Of those employees who were interviewed and answered the question, 63% never had participated in a campaign event, never had volunteers. And of 131 employees, only one employee said he once thought that maybe he felt pressure to make a donation. And in my report, I described that editorial demand for investigation as uninformed and irresponsible. The Star-Ledger never said in its articles or editorial that of the 15 employees who are related to current board members, 8 of them got their jobs before their relative ever joined the board. You read the Star-Ledger story and editorial, you'll never see that. Nor did the Star-Ledger explain that before 2008 in New Jersey, it was legal for boards to employ relatives of board members. Did the Star-Ledger explain that Ronald Davidson, for example, had been brought up on tenure charges because he was accused of not allowing disabled students to ride an elevator, and because he was accused of sexual harassment? That was one of their sources. His bias against the board was not disclosed. Did the Star-Ledger explain that Frank Cuesta has been serving with Mayor Bolwidge on the city council for almost a decade? That Frank Cuesta was a councilman who voted for that shady land deal that the city council had to revoke? Did the Star-Ledger explain that in that same year there was a testimonial dinner for Frank Cuesta, sponsored by Senator Lesniak and Mayor Bolwidge, and where the dinner chairman was Louis Rodriguez, the guy who was supposed to buy the land? Star-Ledger never told their readers that. And we have citations in the report to the most responsible journalistic ethic standards that guide newspapers all over the country and make it crystal clear that if you have a biased source, your obligation is to disclose the source's bias. And that didn't happen. And we outline the bias of every single one of those 7 sources. And because that fundamental principle of journalism was violated, we conclude that the Ledger's reliance on those sources was inconsistent with well-accepted journalistic principles, and that their allegations of political pressure simply are bogus. They're unsubstantiated, and they're not reliable. With over 500 school districts in New Jersey, and here is Elizabeth, a paradigm of the kind of district that our court thought could benefit from adequate funding. A school district that has demonstrated that with enough funding and good leadership, it can provide its children with extraordinary chances for educational progress. Why would the Star-Ledger single out this district for such a hostile, savage, adversary series of articles? I conclude with the observation that the parents of the Elizabeth school children ought to be proud of their school system, and that they justifiably can take pride in the kind of school system that their children attend.